Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Now, as a cost accountant, I would say the better method for allocation is adapt activity based costing. Now, for all these, what do you call it as 5 overheads out there, have I looked at ABC? No, I have looked at only for setup labor. Setup, I know number of hours of setup I have used. Whereas for the other 4, I have not adapted activity based costing out. So let us use the activity based costing method using what you call it this particular Excel sheet out there. I will say activity based costing approach is what we will basically use out here in this particular case out. Let us look at the same 3 products A, B, C out there. I am just going to look at what do you call it as the ABC out here, and let us look at the same 3 products out there A, B and then C out. ABC, I am just going to center it out here for the purpose out here. Now let us simply start with direct material per unit out there. We had already written this direct material per unit. I am just going to copy it from there and paste it out here. We will say direct labor. We already have the direct labor also written somewhere out here, and I am just going to copy that and then basically paste it out here in this particular case out. CT. Now, what are the other overheads out here? As we see, go back and see out here. Let us list down the overheads out there. Let's list down the overheads out there, the other overheads. I'm just going to copy this part of it and paste it somewhere in the Excel sheet so that it's easier for us to work out there. Let us sort of look at pasting all these kind of overheads out there. I'm just going to keep it pasted here for our basic reference out there. I'm just going to keep it pasted for our basic reference out here. Let us sort of try and see if we can for our reference out there. Let us try and see if we can paste it out here in this particular case out there. Let us look at pasting it out here. We have just pasted it. Now we have to look at one by one of these overheads out there. Let us first start with what is called as setup labor, setup. Now you know what is the activity? Activity is machine setup. What is the activity driver? The activity driver is number of times the machine is set up, number of hours you are using for setting up the machine, number of the amount of labor that is consumed for setting up the machine out there. That we calculated. The amount of labor that is used for setting up the machine, we calculated out here. We said that for A it consumes 200 hours, for B it consumes 600 hours, for C it consumes 2200 hours, because for every setup you have to look at what is called as every setup. The setup is dependent on the production run out there. For every production run you have to do a setup. For A there is only one production run, so you have to do what do you call it now? What do you call it as your setup labor required is only about 10 hours is your setup labor required. Per labor hour is about $20. So what do you call? We said that you require about $200 of setup cost out there. Whereas for B, you have 3 production runs, 30 hours is what you require setup. So 30 into what do you call it as 20 is about 600 and so on and so forth. So that is the activity is set up. Driver is number of hours you are spending on setting up the machine for each of these products, the activity driver. So now based on that, we have arrived at the cost out here. Very clearly we have arrived at the cost out there, and let us say this is going to be my cost in this particular case out here. I am just going to paste special. I am going to paste values out there. I am just going to paste the values out. I am just going to paste the value because we have said number of hours, very clear. So based on the number of hours, we have arrived at a setup cost per unit out there. So let us keep that. That's perfectly all. Now let us go to the next one. Let us say receiving. I am spending about 300,000 hours, 300,000. That is about 3 lakhs is what I am spending on receiving. Now, is it unlike here in this particular case out there, my receiving is related to the machine, related to what is called as 43% of my material cost. My receiving will need not have anything to do with the material cost. Imagine I might have a small component I might receive, but the cost might be huge. I might receive a huge component, the cost might be relatively low value out there. So whether the cost of the material, whether will it have anything to do with what we call it as the receiving, may not. Now let us say, then what will have a relationship? The number of times I receive, the number of times I basically receive the component out there, because I am receiving, for example, the number of components and the number of times I receive will have an insignificant impact out there. The number of times and number of components I receive will have a significant impact. Let us see in the case of A. Imagine you are following, let me reiterate, I am going to make some assumptions out there. Imagine you are following what is called as just-in-time management, JIT. You are following what is called as JIT out there, just-in-time management. If you are following just-in-time management or JIT out there in this particular case, let us say that I receive material only once for every production run. I receive number of materials only once for every production run. Imagine if I am following JIT. So for A, I will have only one production run, as you can see out here. So I will receive the components only once out. So my effort is only once as compared to what is called as product C, where I receive the product 10 times out there. So my effort is 10 times higher than what is the effort out there. I am assuming that because you will follow it. Next is also related to the number of components. For example, I receive in product A, the number of components is 5 different components out there. I am going to color these things out. I receive 5 components out there, I receive only once. So imagine I spend time receiving each component only once out there. So the amount of time, that is the receiving, when I say, that is the number of components and number of times, number of times I receive the material. Material is received, I would say, material is received. Number of times the material is received out there is what I am basically looking at. In A, I have only one production run, I have only 5 components. So what happens? I receive the material only 5 times out there in product. Whereas for product E, when I say for product B out there, the number of components in this particular case out here is about 3 production runs. So 3 times I will receive. And each time how many materials I will receive? I will receive each time I will receive 6 components out there. So 6 components I receive 3 times. So that means I will have 18 times I will be receiving the materials out there. 18 times I will be receiving the materials out there. Whereas when I move to product C, that is under the assumption that you receive material as per production run and you are following JIT. Please note I have made another. I have got 10 production runs out there and there are 10 different components out there. That means every time there is a production run, I receive 10 components. So 10 into 10, I receive about roughly 100 times I receive the material. So what is the ratio of this cost, receiving cost to be allocated? If the receiving cost has to be allocated, it has to be allocated in the ratio of 5:18:100 is the ratio in which I have to allocate this, because it is related to the effort involved for receiving. That is, what is activity? Activity is decided as receiving. What is the driver? Number of times you receive. That is, 5 components I receive once, so 5 times I receive. Another one, product B, 6 components I receive 3 times, so 18 times I receive. For product C, 10 components I receive 10 times, so 10 into 10, 100 times I have to receive. So it is the activity driver is number of times I receive. So if I allocate it on this particular basis out there, that is receiving cost. Receiving cost allocated on number of times the components are received. Number of times the components are received. This is the basis on which I am basically going to allocate this particular basic aspect out there, and that is what we let us sort of look at it in this particular case out there. I am just going to wrap the text and let us see that. So what happens? For A, the 300,000 or whatever it is, that is the cost out here in this particular case, that is 300,000 out there, 300,000 into 5 divided by 123. Why 123? 118 plus 5, 100 plus 18 is 118, 118 plus 5 is 123. That is all what we are talking about. So what happens? My receiving cost allocated for the components for received is so much out there, 12,195 out there. I am just going to eliminate all the decimals out here. So per component, what is called direct, what is the receiving cost per unit, receiving cost per unit. This is the total receiving cost, number of units, I have got it out here, number of units is 10,000, receiving cost per unit is about 1.21 in this particular case out there. 1.22 is what I would basically get out here in this particular case out there. Am I 1.22 is what I will get out. I am just checking out. Now I am just going to center all this so that it is easier in this particular case. I am just going to center all this out here. Now let us look at for product B. If I sort of look at, I had 300,000 and then and I had what is called as 18 divided by 123 out there, and that's all. This is going to be the cost out here. Let me eliminate the decimals, and per component out here, per unit, what is going to be the receiving cost? I have basically got it out there. 2.93 is going to be the receiving cost out there, and that is exactly what I have basically got out there in this particular case. For product C, let us sort of look at, it's going to be, what do you call it, as 300,000 minus these two. Obviously it's going to be minus these two, and that's going to be what do you call it, again I'm going to remove the decimals, and I will say my receiving cost per unit is going to be 48.78 out there. This is going to be my receiving cost, is what I am basically looking at in this particular case out there. Let's keep it. Now can I look at the PPT slide, whether I have the calculations out there? Yes, I have all the calculations out there. I have basically got, there's some decimal differences will be there, so don't worry about the decimal differences as we go along. This PPT can be also used as a reference for you out there. Now let us look at, I have finished setup, I have finished receiving out. Now let us look at machines. Machine usage out there is 700,000 out there. That is, I will say machine usage. Now machine usage is basically dependent on number of machine hours consumed out there. That is, the number of machine hours consumed is what we call it. In this particular case, it is in per part out there. Sir, what is the machine hours per hour out there, machine rate per hour? So your total machine usage hours is 10,000. your machine cost is 700,000 is your machine cost, total machine cost. Number of hours is 10,000. That means per hour is $70 is the cost of the machine. Per hour machine is $70. So what happens? Machine usage is a activity. The driver, number of hours you use the machine for every unit of the product. Number of hours you are using for every unit of the product is the machine, is the activity driver, machine hours. That is, I will say, number of hours you are using the machine for every product out there. So, machine cost per unit. So, what are we trying to say? Again, let me repeat. Machine cost activity. Driver, number of hours I use the machine for every product. Number of hours I use the machine is 1/4 hour for A, 1/3 hour for B and half an hour for C. So what happens? My machine cost out here is per hour, it costs about $70 for me. And I use it for 1/4 of an hour for B. So it's about, what do you call it in this particular case? I am using it as in the form of, what do you call it, as a decimal out there. I'm just going to format my cell in this particular case out there, and it's about 17.5. Whereas for product B, machine per hour is $70. For every part, I need 1/3 of an hour. So my cost is, what do you call it, as my cost is about $23.33 out there. For product C, my cost per hour machine is $70. I need half an hour for manufacturing each part. So what happens? It is at $35 per hour. So we have finished setup, we have finished machines, we have finished engineering out there. These are the three we have basically finished as of now. So I am just going to color it for the time being out there. Now next, let us look at packing. Packing is based on what? Now packing is an activity. What is the driver that is making me incur the packing cost? The driver that is making me incur the packing cost is the number of shipments. If the number of shipments, imagine, please note, I am looking at, in this particular case, again I am making an assumption out. That is, I am not looking at individual packing. If it is individual packing per component, then it based on number of components. Let us imagine there is a machine, it's a bulk packing, you are sending it in bulk. So when you are sending it in bulk, the packing cost will depend on number of shipments what you have out there. Let me repeat. If it is individual products out there, then my packing cost will depend on a number of units I manufacture. The activity driver is number of units. Now, for the basis of this particular problem, let me assume you are manufacturing industrial goods and you are sending it everything in bulk out there. So when you are sending it in bulk, what is the driver that is making incur the packing cost? The number of shipments. Every time there is a shipment, you pack and send it out there. So number of shipments become what is called as the activity driver in this case. So if number of shipments is the activity driver out there, let us look at the, what do you call it as, the number of shipment, that is one shipment out there. One is to, so what happens? Packing cost to be allocated on number of shipments. That is in the ratio of 1 is to how many? For A, I have only one shipment. For B, I have 5 shipments. And then for C, I have about 20 shipments out there. For C, I have basically, what do you call it, as I have about 20 shipments out there, and that is what happens in this particular case out there. 1 is to 5 is to 20. So what is the per unit costing cost? Per unit cost out there, the packing cost is 200,000. Let us sort of divide it per unit out there. Let us say 200,000 is the packing cost out there, multiplied by 1 divided by 26, 1 divided by 26 out there, and the whole thing divided by the number of units I manufactured, because I need to get per unit cost out there. I need to get what is called as per unit cost out there. I am looking at per unit out there. So what happens? My packing cost comes down to about roughly about, in this particular case, about 0.76 or 77 out there. per unit out there, packing cost per unit. Let me also add per unit out here. Again, I go back here and I will say I am going to start a parenthesis and let us say 200,000 into what is called as my 5 by 26, the whole thing divided by my number of units out here. In this particular case is 15,000. So what happens? Per unit, my packing cost is about 2.56 out here. Whereas in the case of C, what happens when 200,000 out there? 200,000 out there. Sorry, I just need to use the parenthesis. 200,000 into what is called as the it's 20 by 26 and the whole thing divided by the number of units of C, and that's basically what we see. It's about 30.76 is what we see out here. So packing is basically allocated based on the number of shipments out there. Now we have what is called as engineering. What is the driver? The problem has not given you any driver per se for engineering. Sir, can I assign it based on the machine hours? Yes and no. Because your machine engineering, when we say it is for creating some basic die, some design, etc., etc., etc. Now, what is the activity driver that is making incur that cost? I don't have the information. Neither is it going to be. It's going to be a whole lot of components, and I may not, the amount of time I might spend with the design engineer, the amount of spend I make die, the R&D and so on and so forth. It might be extremely difficult for me to even arrive at a specific driver out there. It could be a combination of a lot of things. At that stage, what happens? There could be costs like this. So what happens? At the stages, you use what is called as a judgment. You use what is called as an interview method out there. That is, you talk to the key personnel who are involved with that particular cost, who are involved with that particular cost that is being incurred. In this particular case, I will talk to the design manager, I will talk to the production manager, come up with what is called as possibly a subjective assessment out there. That is what I talked to you when we talked to you about it. We said that ABC costing is fine, but it may not be universally applicable for all kinds of overheads. I gave you an example, employee welfare expenditure. Now I might say, if I organize a gym out there, a gym facility, employee welfare, the cost of running a gym will not be based on the number of hours that is used by every employee from each of associated with each of these particular 3 products out there. I don't know. It might be even very difficult. The usage may not even have a pattern out there. Some days the employee from product A might use more. Some day from employees from product C might use more. I may not even have a pattern. So overall, I might talk to the person who is running the welfare center, get some judgment out there. I might talk to various employees. Basically, in such cases, I tend to make what is called a subjective assessment out there. So, let us take in this particular case, I have made some subjective assessment out there based on the discussions with the production manager. And the production manager says, normally, it's engineering workload, it's basically divided, engineering workload is divided in the ratio of 25% for A, 35% for B and 40% for C out there. That is what basically I have used again a subjective assessment. Please note, I have used what is called as a subjective assessment again out here in this particular case. 25% for A. I have just missed out A out there. So it could be, basically it could be subjective. So there are situations when you may have to use subjective assessment, but subjective also cannot be very arbitrary. It has to be based on some evidence out there. In this case, the evidence could be the discussion. Like I said, welfare center and discussions out there. So what happens? Let me see. Now let me look at dividing this particular cost. Based on that, I see about 500,000 is spent on engineering, and then into 25% out there for product A, divided by what is called as number of units of product A. I have what is called as number of units of product A is given out here. So per unit, my cost is about 12.5 out there. So let us say for B, 500,000 into 35% out there, and divided by the number of components for product B, so on, and then 11.66 if I am looking at out here. And for product C also, it's going to be the same 500,000 into what is called as 40% out there, divided by the number of units. So I get what is called as a per unit cost out there, $40 for C out. So what is my total cost? So let me hide this column out there so that it's easier, it looks better. So what is my total cost? Total cost as per ABC. Total cost as per ABC is my engineering cost plus my packing cost plus my machine cost plus my receiving cost plus my my setup cost plus my direct labor and my what is called as direct materials per unit out there. So I am going to hide this also slightly so it looks better. So it is about 62.01 is the cost for A, 77 for product B, and 169 for 99 for product C out there. Let me go back to my slides out there. Let me go back to my slides now. We did all this. Now the same thing, that is what I have done. There would be a very minute decimal difference, 169.84 in whereas and 77.24, whereas in my Excel sheet has 77.20 and 169.99. There is what do you call it as a decimal difference out there. Please bear with me on the decimal difference because that is basically what we say. Here I round it off and put it on the Excel sheet and so on. Now let me go back. I am just comparing out here. What did I compare? I compared conventional first method. You said yeah, cost of A is 105, cost of B is 87, cost of C is 52, and you had your selling price out there. Whatever, 162, 125 and so on. Now you had a refined method. You said no, cost of A is 73, cost of B is 96, cost of C is 89. Whereas when you do as for ABC, you see that the cost of A is only $62. You are basically making $100 profit on that most profitable product. Product B, the cost is only 77. You are selling at 125, almost double, close to double. Whereas product C, your cost is 169, you are selling at 121, you are thinking that you are making a lot of margin, because if you had seen this out here, you thought that you are making a 35% margin in product C out there, and you are making what is called as only 50% margin in product C out here, and you are making only 31% margin in product B. But in reality is very different out here. Reality is very different out here in this case. You see this, I have given you the margins out there, the conventional approach. Whereas in reality, in product A, you are making at about 62% margin is what you are selling. B, you are selling at 39%, and then C, you are actually selling at a negative margin. Imagine if you had taken a decision based on the earlier allocation to drop product B and manufacture more of product C. Then what happens? You are heading for a disaster. That's what I said. Your company would be winding up very fast, because in the earlier case, what is happening? You are cross-subsidizing the cost of C with the cost of, by loading on the cost to product A or product B. I repeat, you are cross-subsidizing C by loading on the cost to product A or product B. Imagine you had dropped product B, you had focused everything on product C, or you had dropped product A and B and you had manufactured only product C because product C is giving you 50% margin. Then what happens? The very next month you will be shutting shop and then running away from there, because the avenues to cross-subsidize is not existing. All costs are getting loaded, and that is when it will hit you on the face that you will realize that the cost is high. So what are we looking at in this particular case? Allocation of the cost out there, allocation of the cost, allocation of appropriate cost out there. all the costs, overheads, pick up the activity, then allocate it based on the activity driver. That is when your costing will be precise. That is where your cost calculation will be precise. This example is very evident to know that a wrong allocation could lead to very decisions which are not feasible at all in this case. If you now I will say, oh, B is also making 39%, so I can even reduce the price of B. I can even reduce the price of A to capture more market. I have to increase the price of C because it's as of now giving me negative margin out there, because most of the cost is borne by C. Unfortunately, it is being cross subsidized by A and B. So, appropriate allocation of cost, only then you will know what is the cost of each of these products. So, identify cost based on the activity and the activity driver. That is all what we talk about in activity based costing. Activity based costing can be used in these kind of industries: healthcare, telecommunications, retailing, transportation, healthcare, and many more. Okay, and that is basically brings us to the end of what is called as activity based costing. Right? In the next class, we move ahead with the next topic, that is, we are moving into decision making. We are moving into what we call it as what are the components of cost accounting that we are going to use for decision making. What are the components that we are specifically going to use for decision making? I will be loading a problem on a abacus out there, and we will try and see if we can solve it and go on. Thank you.